Hi there, this is a quick video to explain the basics of the French and Indian War. This is our second learning target in the content bubble for the Road to the Revolution. We've already described how distinct regions developed during the colonial period, and now we're going to use the cognitive skill of hypothesizing to help us explain the causes and effects of the French and Indian War. This relates to our first essential question in the content bubble, which is how did taxation and political control lead to increasing tension between the British and the American colonists? And as always, this relates to our unit question for division, which is what is worth fighting for? So, as a little bit of a background, what exactly is a colony? Well, a colony is a country or an area under the full or partial political control of another country. Typically, it's one that is far away, and it's occupied by settlers from that country. So these 13 colonies that we refer to are owned, they are controlled, they are operated and occupied by the British. So when we talk about people living in 13 colonies, they are British citizens, and they're living in these colonies across the Atlantic Ocean. This video shows briefly when the 13 colonies were originally formed, starting with Virginia in 1607, that's the Jamestown colony, all the way through Georgia in 1732. Okay, so one of the things we looked at in class is this map showing two different claims, specifically the French and the British claims in North America. That's what's represented by the red and the blue. And in particular, there's one portion of this map that is very important for the French and Indian War, and that's the striped area along the region labeled as Louisiana. That is the area that is going to be disputed by both the British and the French in North America. It's referred to as the Ohio River Basin, which is an area that both the British and the French, as they gained more land in North America in the 16 and 1700s, they both claimed ownership over this area. And it was a very important piece of land. That's why there was so much tension about who should control it. A lot of it had to do with resources that were located there and trade, the ability to move those resources along rivers like the Ohio River and the Mississippi River to be able to transport goods and make money from them. So this map side by side shows the boundaries of what the British claimed and the French claimed, both before the French and Indian War, which is 1754, and then after the French and Indian War in 1763. Okay, so causes of the French and Indian War. There are three main causes. Some of it has to do with land, others has to do with people, and then finally there's a broader context of conflict between the British and the French. So first of all, the land. Both France and Britain wanted to control the Ohio River Valley, so they wanted to occupy that territory, be able to control it, and use it for its resources and transportation. Then in terms of people, British colonists were continually moving into this region, which had previously been occupied by Native Americans, of course, and French settlers, those who had lived there for many years trading furs and making money off of that land. And so as the British moved into that land, we have tension rising between the British and the French. And that was very significant because at the time, in the mid-1700s, France and Britain were huge rivals throughout the rest of the world. And so this became a flashpoint between these two powerful European nations. If you look at this map, you can see a lot of the main battle points during the French and Indian War, and you'll notice that many of them take place kind of in this border area between what the British claimed and the French claimed. Okay, so early on in the war, things did not go particularly well for the British. A young military commander named George Washington, he lost a battle and had to surrender a fort called Fort Necessity. Fort Necessity is not too far from Pittsburgh today. You can go and visit it. It's not much to see. It's very small. And another important British commander, General Braddock, was killed in a loss near Fort Duquesne, which is in present-day Pittsburgh. One of the reasons that the British did not do well early in the year also is because of Native Americans. Many of the tribes that were living in the area sided with the French in this conflict, primarily because they had long been trading partners with the French, and so they had relationships there. They felt comfortable continuing to work with them. The Iroquois Confederacy, however, is one primary example of a group that joined to help the British. So there are 6 Native American nations that belong to this larger confederacy, and they did join the British. However, most tribes sided with the French in this conflict. Here's a picture of Fort Necessity today, a recreation of the original fort. It's really not much to see, but this is one of the locations for the French and Indian War. And here, if you recognize this picture, this is the Point in Pittsburgh. So if you go down to the Point, you can see the outline of a fort in the ground. That's the outline of the original French fort, Fort Duquesne. There it is on a map today. So, partway through the war, things started to turn in favor of the British, and one main reason why is because of this individual right here. This is William Pitt. William Pitt was the Prime Minister of Britain, and he convinced King George III that this was a fight worth fighting, that it would be in the king's best interest to commit the troops, the money, the supplies to defeat the French, to claim this territory in North America for the British, rather than simply giving in and allowing the French to claim it. So in 1759 and 1760, the British captured 2 very important French cities of Quebec and Montreal, which of course are today in French-speaking Canada. So again, tracing roots all the way back to the French and Indian War. The reason why parts of Canada today speak French is because it was settled by the French initially. In the long run, the British end up winning the French and Indian War, which you probably could have guessed because in the United States, the primary language is English and not French. So the final decision to settle the conflict is called the Treaty of Paris of 1763. In this treaty, Britain gained all of New France and as well as Spanish Florida, which essentially removes the French from this territorial claim. Then King George of England, he forbid all of his colonists from settling west of the Appalachian Mountains until the area could be made more secure. So he wanted to prevent another fight from being provoked, and so he told the British colonists not to move into this area that they had fought for. And so the line that kind of established this westward boundary is called the Proclamation Line of 1763. But this made the colonists really upset because the whole purpose of fighting this war with the French was to be able to move west. And so they felt that it was very unfair that King George would tell them, congratulations, you've won the war, but now you can't go and enjoy the land that you fought for. So again, here are those 2 maps showing the boundaries before the war and then after. And as you can see here, this is the land that the French had to relinquish. Louisiana was given to Spain, and we saw with westward expansion that that land was kind of bounced back and forth between Spain and France and ultimately the United States with the Louisiana Purchase. But clearly the big winners here are the British. They claim all of this new land, but again, they're not allowed to move west of that pink line there, the Proclamation Line of 1763. On top of that, one final effect for the French and Indian War is the necessity of taxes. So wars are very, very expensive. It takes a lot of money to supply, transport, feed, clothe, arm soldiers. And so one way that governments often pay for wars is to increase taxes. So that's just what King George did. He decided to raise the taxes on the colonists who were living in North America in order to pay for the war. But this made the colonists even more upset because they were not given any say in deciding on those taxes for the colonies. And as we will see throughout this content bubble, that's going to be a major sticking point for these colonists. So that's a brief recap on the French and Indian War. If you need any help or have any questions, feel free to ask. Thanks.